All right, so this is slightly longer, but not much, than the tales we usually read. I usually try to pick something short. This is pretty short. So we might want to, but it's long enough that we might want to take turns. So why doesn't somebody volunteer to be the first korban, the first sacrifice, and we'll go on from there.
I'll volunteer. And
Okay,
should we just alternate paragraphs and go around the room? Does that sound good?
That does sound good. There are a variety of sections. It's divided by section. I'm trying to scroll this down.
Oh, I haven't given you permission.
Oh, okay. That's why I didn't work.
Now you have permission.
Okay, terrific. Yeah, I think you might, by paragraph might be nice. Good idea, Michael.
All right, do you want to go back? Should we want to start right here without the introduction, or do you want to do the introduction?
Let's do the introduction.
Once there were two homeowners in a city who had great wealth, large houses, and two sons. That is, each one of them had a son. The two children learned together in the same schoolhouse. One of them was a chacham, clever, smart, sophisticated, wise, and the other was a tam, simple, innocent, artless, wholesome. Not that he was a fool, rather his intellect was simple without sophistication. The two sons loved each other very much. Even though one was a chacham and the other was a tam, they nevertheless loved each other very much.
Oh, that's such a short one. Go ahead.
Came a time when the two householders began to decline. They continued to decline until they lost everything and became destitute with nothing remaining but their houses. As the sons began to grow up, their fathers told them, "We do not have enough to pay for you to sustain you. Do for yourselves what you can."
Okay, well, let's stop here for a second. Okay. So does any of this sound familiar?
Yes, but I don't remember where.
Yeah, from the Passover
exactly.
Haggadah.
Exactly.
Except there are two missing.
There's only two sons, yes, but their characteristics in terms of their understanding, their mental acuity, and so forth, sounds a lot like the four sons in the Haggadah. Right. So I just wanted to put that in the background.
Okay.
But you're right that it doesn't track closely in terms of the content, but it's a similar kind of structure. Okay, so two householders. We are not told why their fortunes begin to decline, but the decline is enough that the sons have to do for themselves. So the assumption we would start out with is that the sons have been taken care of by the father. This is not an unusual situation. If you have a son, a father or father-in-law, it was often father-in-law, would pay for the maintenance of the son-in-law in order for them to maintain their status as perpetual students. And the father or father-in-law would pay for them to continue in the yeshiva or with their private tutors or whatever. Now, that's not said explicitly here, but you'd have to sort of assume that the idea is that the young men were not on their own, that they were being taken care of in a sort of, what's the word I'm looking for? In a way that doesn't rely upon them developing any real independence or any real initiative.
Why the father-in-law? I missed something.
Oh, well, because often when a marriage would take place back in their home, the old country, part of the attraction of a bride was that the father of the bride was wealthy enough to provide for, among other things, the education, the continuing education of the son-in-law. So
I see. This would be part like a dowry.
kind of like a dowry. I mean, it's not actual cash that's transmitted to the young man, but his sustenance, his lessons, et cetera, would be taken care of by the father-in-law. That was a chief.
So there was a real value on continuing education.
Yes.
That's neat.
That was the standard in Eastern Europe, that the sons, at least one of them, would be provided for in order to continue to be a student. And you're right to point out that this may have something to do with the particular or peculiar emphasis on education that we have in the Jewish community.
Would the person, would this person, the son, be expected also to work?
No, he was a full-time student.
So this is parallel to what's going on with some Orthodox Jews, where they just learn and pray.
That's right.
Now, yeah.
Well, those that can.
Well, that's true. I mean,
right. I mean, to Kim's point. I mean, not all Orthodox Jews can do that, but some of them do find. Some of the men do find women whose fathers can help take care of them, and then they become the perpetual student.
Right. Now, that's exactly right. Not everybody can afford to do it. It was one of the attractions that a certain maid might have in terms of getting a husband, that her father would be able to do this. And of course, it was not by any means universal. So you get now a sense of what kind of young men these were. But here's the rub. Both of the sons, the one who was intelligent and the one who was not so intelligent, were both getting the same treatment. So we start off with this idea of study, even for those who are not necessarily, you might say, the best suited for it. Even if you are on the lower intelligence levels, it was still a great mitzvah to study. So and the point here also is that despite their disparity in terms of ability, these two young men were friends. So the friendliness was not because they were commensurate in terms of intelligence. There had to be something else that brought them together and allowed them to be friends despite these other disparities. So we're learning about how we deal with people of different intelligence, different talents, and skills. The interesting thing is that one finds value in a relationship even with somebody who is very differently abled than you are. Now, it implies certain things about what your attitude might be or should be. That despite that friendship is something that surmounted intelligence and academic capabilities. So there's an implied scale of values here. So, all right, there's more we can say, but let's move on. Would somebody take the next paragraph?
Okay, the simple man and the clever man learn trades. The town went and learns shoemaking. The Kahan, is that?
Chacham.
Kahan, who was a bar Havina and a student.
Or Havana, a
Havana.
person of understanding.
Okay, and an astute, discerning person didn't want to apply himself to such a common trade. He decided he would travel the world and see what to do. As he was going around the marketplace, he saw a large wagon with 4 horses in harness speeding through. He called to the merchants. "Where are you from?" They answered, "We're from Mussar." "Where are you going?" "Warsaw." He answered, "Perhaps you need goods." They saw that he was astute, motivated, and looked good. Huh? And so they accepted him. He traveled off with them and served them very well along the way.
Okay, so he doesn't have any particular disconnection from manual labor, even though he's being cultivated as a full-time student. This is there are a lot of stories. This is just one of them, which deal with the Talmid Chacham, the wise student, who gets involved with manual skills.
Mm-hmm.
And indeed, the early rabbis, many of them were people who had trades. Sometimes they were agricultural, like being a shepherd, whatever, but sometimes there were artisans who made various kinds of objects. There were the early rabbis who were independently wealthy because they owned a lot of land. So there was a wide diversity of levels of health and so on and so forth. But this guy seems, well, what would you say? Is he intrigued or attracted to manual labor, or what do you think his attitude is?
Well, it says he didn't want to apply himself to such a common trade.
Right. Yes, but then it goes on to say.
He thought, but then he tried to get this. He got this job.
Right. So what do we make out of that? He's not attracted to common manual labor, but he's willing to take this job nonetheless.
Well, he's willing to take a chance. He's willing to experiment and go off.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, because he's taking this tour to see what's out in the world that he might do. And of course, true to form, he starts out by going around the marketplace of the town where he lives. That's, it's like Thoreau saying, I don't know, he was asked, was ever a disability not to travel, sitting out at Walden Pond? He said, no, but I've traveled extensively in Walden. So that's what this guy is doing. He's looking and learning in a kind of global way, but in his locale. Okay. So does this strike a chord with anybody? See, this is the way my mind works. There's an old song, a popular song, called "Back in Your Own Backyard." You can go to the east, you can go to the west. Someday you'll fall weary in heart back when you started from. You find that something or other prize is right under your eyes, back in your own backyard. Okay, so this is like Thoreau traveling extensively in Walden, and finding stuff to learn, to be exposed to, even there. So there is this kind of irony of the young man who embarks on, the extensive world tour. Now, and that was what young men of wealth did. This is a story that is from since Nachman it was written in the early 19th century, right? Around somewhere between 1800 and 1810, which is when Nachman passed away from tuberculosis. This is during the time when in general culture, the children, particularly the sons, but the girls too, daughters too, would, if they could afford it, take sort of the grand tour to Europe. And they would go to Paris or Florence or wherever and spend time in each one of these places. If you think that that might be interesting to you, there's the famous novel by, what's his name? The brother of the philosopher.
Henry James.
That's right, Henry James, which deals exactly with this. It's a wonderful novel. So, all right. So he's going to try to broaden his knowledge, his understanding, his experience in the world, but he's going to do it by touring, as it were, or examining or exploring his own local scene. And of course, this is already determined because the merchants that he talks to are from Warsaw and they're going back to Warsaw. So they're not going anywhere special either. Okay, next paragraph, please.
And in the Nachman stories, there's always a lot of traveling.
There is. You're right. That is a characteristic of his stories. And you can sort of imagine why that's important, because the whole point that we're dealing with is, you might say, a kind of travel. You know, if you're talking about spiritual development or learning, that's about movement. That's about starting out in one place and winding up in a very different place.
And it's also parallels with the 40 years in the desert.
Yes, that's true. And during that, we can talk about that for a minute. I don't want to get too sidetracked. But one way to read the story about the wanderings in the wilderness of the Israelites is that they have a series of learning experiences at various stops along the way, where moral issues or theological issues are brought up, and they have to come to consider them. And a large part of the dissension between Moses and the Israelites as a group is because they see these things in very different ways. So the background of this is about travel, but not necessarily physical travel, but educational or philosophical travel, the kind of travel that we're talking about in terms of personal growth. Okay, next paragraph, please.
I just wanted to bring up before we go to the next paragraph that it's also the hero's journey. And it's also the story we read about the pearl and the princess and the, he had to go through different tasks and travel different places.
Yes.
And so this is, it actually is, I guess, the hero's journey is what they would call it for all of that.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm done.
Thank you very much. That was very helpful. I mean, that is not just in terms of Nachman's stories, but in many different cultures and groups, there's stories about how at a certain stage in life, children, mostly young sons, have to go through a journey, whether it's a purely metaphorical journey or a spiritual journey. This is something that is common in lots of different tribes and clans and peoples and so on and so forth. Sometimes it involves an actual journey. You have to go out and explore and find something. Sometimes it isn't an actual journey. It's a metaphorical journey. But this is a good example of that, where what is going to make the distinction between the Tom, the simple-minded person, son, and the Chacham, the wise one, is going to be their experience, although there are some twists along the way, as you probably could imagine.
I'm thinking about the fact that the 40-year journey was actually a very short distance that they could have gone.
Oh, yes.
But they needed that time and those experiences.
Yes, and I think it's important to point out that the journey in the wilderness was complex, but not long. That it mirrors what happens here and some of the other stories in that, or like I mentioned, Thoreau, of a journey which is extensive, although it is not distant. So you might say, and this is kind of up your alley, Kim, this dealing with the difference between meditation and contemplation. That is where the idea is either to focus on the detail and pay attention to small things and rest from those wisdom and knowledge and so forth, or to open one's mind expansively and learn from a variety of experiences with great variety. Both of those are standard and popular approaches to the gaining of mystical or theological knowledge. So we're dealing here, as of now, with more of the examination of a narrow span, and the implication being that even the examination of the narrow span can yield very broad, very suggestive knowledge and understanding. You don't have to necessarily go far if you are paying attention in the proper way to your immediate surrounding. Okay. So let's go to the next paragraph, please.
Okay, I'll read. When they arrived in Warsaw, since he was the Bar Havana, right, he decided, since I am already in Warsaw, why should I remain with these merchants? Maybe there's a better place than with them. I shall go search and see. As he walked around in the marketplace, he began to investigate and inquire about the men who had brought him and whether they would be a better place than with them. They answered that these people who had brought him are honest people and it's good to be with them. However, it is very difficult to be with them since their business dealings are in very distant places.
Okay, so we're beginning on this idea of travel. And what do you learn about the concern or the interest of the Bar Havana or the Talmid Chacham? What is he looking for?
Well, he's looking for something different, and he's willing to take a risk and go even further, whether it be physically or spiritually or whatever.
Yeah, he's willing to go on a trip, however we understand the trip to be contributed, without knowing in advance what the outcome will be. And my good friend Scam Likely. So what are we saying about the learning process here?
Well, he doesn't have a specific destination in mind or a specific thing in mind, but he's open to the exploration and investigation, really, of, gee, what's this like? What's that like? Is there something better?
Yeah, he seems to be open to different experiences, and even though he is open to new experiences, he wants to make sure that he's got good colleagues, good valuable people that he's traveling with. So this brings up a couple of interesting points in my mind. The idea that one goes off on a spiritual quest without knowing the end point is where Judaism begins. The trip that Abraham goes on when he leaves his father's house, so on and so forth, doesn't have a specific end point that is known in the beginning.
Yeah.
God is going to lead him wherever God wants to, and the point is being open to being led, to not being in complete control of your own exploration. What does that suggest to you?
Well, probably pretty common. Like Buddha studied with a number of teachers before he went his own path, and also Jesus was trained as a Jew and then went his own path.
You know, there's interesting scholarship that suggests that in the story of Jesus in the New Testament, you know, there's a gap in the narrative. There's a period of some time when we don't know what Jesus was doing. And some scholars maintain that he went on a spiritual journey to the east.
Yeah, I've read about that. In fact, some say he was in this little town, and the little town doesn't think anything about it, that Jesus had been there.
Well, he didn't have a name yet. What can I say? It's hard to know because the sources are scanty. But they are suggestive that he went on some kind of journey, perhaps to the east, and came into contact with Hinduism or Buddhism or something along those lines. And that this then informed his teaching when he came back years later to the land of Israel.
I'm feeling a little negative about this guy to travel to be taken to Warsaw by these men and then to question about whether he wants to work for him. It doesn't seem completely ethical.
Oh, but he served them well along the way.
Yeah, he was just going for a ride. He didn't say, "I'm going to work for you." He just said, "Are you going to Warsaw?" And he said, "Sure."
Well, he said, "Perhaps you need workers." They saw he would, so they accepted him.
That's true. Yeah. But here's a question. I'm glad you made this point, Tim, because the question that I would like to put before the House is that on this spiritual quest that the wise son, as it were, is going on, he is concerned that he is going along with other people who are going to be supportive, who are not going to be working or living in such a way that they might undermine what his goals are. He doesn't want to be a manual laborer, although that is the kind of work that can be offered to him. But he wants a community of people who are supportive, regardless of whatever their trade might be, so that his own explorations will bear some fruit. Now, this is important because we're starting off, remember, with two sons, one of whom is a bar havana, a person of understanding and sophistication and nuance and so on and so forth, and the Tom, the simple son, and who yet were are close friends despite their intellectual differences. So I think that what the Bar Havanah, the more intelligent son, is looking for is to find companions, a community that he can travel with, which will provide the support that he needs to learn, even though they themselves may or may not be learned. They may or may not have a sophisticated understanding of spiritual matters. This is something that I find personally very interesting because it jibes with the prejudice or the preference that Judaism has to avoid monastic communities. We don't tend to emphasize people going off and living apart from average people and living only with people who share the same intellectual or theological concerns. The rabbis, earliest rabbis, and later on too, were encouraged to have a job, to have a career, other than study. So you could, you think of Akiba, who was a shepherd, or Tarfon, who was a landowner.
What was Shammai?
I'm sorry?
What was Shammai?
That's a good question. I don't recall.
Okay.
There was another one who was a tanner, and I forget which one it was, Rabbi Shimon, I think. And that's interesting in and of itself because, just like in our day, different professions had different reputations, different evaluations, and the lowest profession was to be a tanner. Why? Because you had to deal with these stinky chemicals all the time that impregnated your skin, and so you were constantly walking around with this horrible smell, like pig pen in Charles Schulz cartoons. So being a tanner was a very negative thing. And in fact, if you look at the maps of ancient Jerusalem, the tanneries, which they had there, were put off to the side. If you were poor, you lived near a tannery. If you could afford it, you lived far away from the tannery.
It sounds like toxic dumps in poor neighborhoods.
It really does. It does. And there is not just recently with this concern about income inequality, but for a long time, the settlement of towns and villages had these characteristics. My first congregation was in Plattsburgh, New York, which is on Lake Champlain, 20 miles south of the Canadian border. And there were paper mills in, if you've ever driven past a paper mill, they really stink. It's like driving past the cracking plants on Route 1 in New Jersey. Also not
or any place in North Jersey. Actually, northeast Jersey. Jersey.
Yeah, right near the water. Yeah. You move in just a little bit, and it's actually very nice.
Yes, it is. I grew up in South Jersey, so I know. Yeah, it's very nice. Very nice.
Yeah, I had a college roommate who came from a place called Basking Ridge, which is exactly what you're talking about. About 5 or 10 miles inland from the cracking plants, and it was just beautiful.
Yeah.
Anyway,
what kind of plant is that? A cracking?
A cracking plant. They separate crude oil into its various components: gasoline, kerosene, other kinds of products that are derived from the crude oil. And what they do is they basically raise the temperature of the oil, and they channel it so that they are uh, at different temperature levels, different products, so to speak, are drawn off
I see.
from the
Yeah,
crude oil.
since I'm from Chicago, we drove through Gary, Indiana, and that was a place where that stunk.
Oh, it's so amazing, and I don't want to, go down this rabbit hole too far. But when I first came to Texas, I was driving from Seattle in my station wagon, and I had to drive through Abilene. Has any of you ever driven in Abilene?
Oh, drove through it.
So what does it smell like in Abilene?
I guess we had the air conditioning on and the windows closed. There was nothing.
You drive through all these stockyards, and it is just a horrific odor. And that was my introduction to Texas, driving through the stockyards in Abilene. Anyway, so let's get back to the text. We still have a little bit of time. And would somebody like to pick up the next paragraph?
I will. So he went on. He noticed clothing shop workers as if they were going, whoops. Okay. Let's see where. As if they were going around the marketplace with all their customary charm, with their caps and pointy shoes and the rest of the affectations and flair in their gait and appearance. Since he was so sharp and discerning, the occupation looked very proper, being pleasant and local. So he went to the man who brought him and gave them his praise and appreciation, and he told them that it was not comfortable for him to be with them, and as for recompense, for having brought him, he had served them on the road. And yeah, that was said before. He did.
Right. And
so he felt even.
Yeah. So they got some work from him. They took care of him on the journey. But now he saw something that intrigued him. These people with different kinds of costumes and different kinds of work and different customs. Okay, so let's. So he's still looking around. He's still exploring. Let's read the next paragraph.
So he went and offered himself to a proprietor. And the way with servants is, at first one has to be hired for less and do the heavier work. Then later one advances to better jobs. The proprietor would use him for very hard work, sending him off to nobility, carrying merchandise in the manner of servants, prominently displaying the garments on their extended arms. This work was very hard for him. Sometimes he needed to carry the merchandise to upper floors, and this work was very hard for him. He decided, since he was a philosopher, a discerning person, why do I need this work? Is not the main point the ultimate purpose, to get married and make a living? I don't need to see to that yet. I will be free for that later, in the years to come. Meanwhile, it would be better to travel, visiting countries, feasting my eyes on the world.
Okay, that's pretty straightforward. There is a little bit of resentment on his part that worms its way into his attitude. It doesn't seem to me, I don't know if you all would agree, that he's quite as open in this paragraph as he was in the two paragraphs before. So part of his experience in this traveling with these folks that he encounters on the road is that maybe an underlying attitude of self-importance is expressed. Now, I wanted to mention this because as we're thinking about the spiritual development and learning and growing, it's very easy for us to forget that we are brought up with certain prejudices, and that these can get in the way of having the experiences that we truly want to have. And this turns out to be the case with this Bar Havana, that having grown up in a life of privilege, he still has those values lurking underneath the surface, even though he is trying, I think it's fair to say, to move past them. So, you know, having grown up in a middle-class household, it's something that I can identify with. It's hard to imagine what life is really like for people who don't have that experience of being middle class, or whatever class you happen to be a part of. You know, so I'm thinking of, for as an example, a movie called My Man Godfrey with William Powell and Carol Lombard. He plays what was called a forgotten man, a hobo, and she is the daughter of a very wealthy Manhattan family. And she asks these naive questions about, well, why don't you just do this? Why don't you just do that? You don't have to be a hobo. And of course, she doesn't understand how difficult it is to do these, what seem to be simple things, if you don't have that background. You know, that's part of what's going on here, it seems to me, is the conflict within this one son between what he professes, what he would like to be able to assert, the lifestyle they'd like to adopt, and his background. I mention this because when we talk about learning new ways of thinking and being in the world in terms of spiritual development, we often forget that we are very substantially shaped by an historical experience or family or customary experience that has become a part of us that we don't even see anymore. It's hard to imagine because, you know, on the one hand, this guy, as he demonstrates, and it's true for most of us, we see the value of adopting a different stance, but we don't often, we're not often aware of how our past lives, how our past experience continue to shape how we see things and how we evaluate our experiences, even though we have adopted consciously a different pathway. So the implication is that in order to grow, we have to be clear about how our past experiences need to be seen in a different way. We have to be aware of them, and we have to take them into account as we experience new things. That our old way of being in the world is going to creep in, even though we are conscious of wanting to adopt a different path.
Well, I have a good example of that conversation we had with our son, or I had with our son, just a couple of days ago. He was saying that he and I had totally different views of what money was for. And he gave the example of if I were given $500,000, he said, he would go out and buy some property, probably ranch property or the down payment anyhow. Yeah. And he knows very well that we wouldn't do that. We would spend a little bit of it and put the rest in the savings account. And yeah. It was because we were brought up in the Depression during World War II. And although we were middle class, money was not freely tossed around.
Right.
And he is basically spoiled rotten.
No judgment there.
Not really. Not really.
Well,
but he.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
That was it. I mean, he has gotten everything he wanted and needed. And as he told us, we look for the bargains and he looks for the best. And that is one way, that's one way looking at life, and it's true.
Well, all right. That may be true. You know, it's so interesting to see how these things turn out. My youngest child, my daughter Emily, she's the one we adopted from China. She is a real tightwad. And if you go shopping, either me or Linda with Emily, you know, you will watch things, you look at things in the store, and you say, gee, that's kind of a nice thing. Emily's response to that is, Mom, you don't need that.
Right.
Or Dad, you don't need that. You know, so she is a very frugal person. And now Linda is kind of frugal, but not, you know, tremendously so. I, on the other hand, am a spendthrift. So we very quickly stopped going shopping, Emily and me, because it was too much of a battle. But how she got to be that way is hard to understand, because she doesn't get it from either one of us, I don't think. Who knows?
Who knows?
Do we have time to skip in one short paragraph? Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, it's almost time, but there's time for a short paragraph.
Yeah, the next one is very short.
Yeah. He went about the marketplace and saw the merchants riding on a large wagon. He said to them, "Where are you going?" "To Laguna." "Will you take me there?" "Yes." And they took him there. From there, he traveled to Italy, and from there to Spain. And so he's expanding his horizons.
Yes. And so now we're moving in a different direction. It's not Thoreau exploring things extensively in Walden. It's he's now he really is on the grand tour, but you know, it's not exactly a grand tour, because these are not, he's not going first class exactly.
Right.
You know, this is, you know, I don't think this is actually true, but I imagine him going from place to place and, you know, staying in student hostels or something of that sort, you know. But even the small bit of exploration he's done up till this point has opened the world to him. By being open and considerate, being able to consider new experiences, even within a small range, it leads to an ongoing process of exploration and new experiences. So he's going somewhere. I don't think he knows yet where, but we'll try to figure that out next time. All right, we should probably stop here for today. Thank you all very much, and we'll continue next Friday.
Everybody, take care.
Take care. Have a good Shabbos.